Natural gas had never seemed so important as it does right now in 2022. It is now the driving force behind a collapsing economy of tens of different countries all at once. Energy security as well has never been so important in history as well, and so at times like these, everyone is on edge. Right now though, over the last couple of days, things just got so much worse. Explosions have been reported along the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines, which export natural gas from Russia into Europe. These pipelines are no longer operational at all, no matter what anyone does. Gas prices had already been at sky-high levels of over 700% of what they used to be throughout 2022, and they just got even higher. People all over Europe are going to go cold this winter with no way to heat their homes or even cook their food. The craziest thing about all of this though is that no one really knows exactly what's happening outside of our governments. This video will establish exactly what we do know about this whole situation, about what actually happened, what the main theories are behind who actually carried out this act, and then of course we'll look at the economic impact of something as monumental as this. Now, what exactly happened then? Well, a couple of days ago, we got news that pressure in Nord Stream 2 and the Nord Stream 1 pipelines reduced massively overnight, and this was entirely unexpected. So people got very worried about a potential gas leak from these pipes, and they started to look for one. Unfortunately, they found one, and they found these massive bubbles of air above the Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic Sea, which you're currently looking at. Specifically, this area is outside of territorial waters, though only just, and it's actually in a contested economic zone of control just off the coast of Denmark. We then started to get some data from seismologists, people who usually look and monitor things like earthquakes and tremors, and they found some disturbances in those regions where the pipelines were. Now, it was at the time thought to be possible that this was from natural causes like some kind of earthquake or tremor, but that was still incredibly unlikely. And at this point in time right now, pretty much everyone in the world agrees that actually these were explosions that were monitored, and this was a deliberate act of sabotage to destroy or to stop these pipelines from working. We now know that these pipelines are no longer operational, that these explosions are the reason they're no longer operational, and that this was the intention of an action by a certain party. The Danish defense minister has said that a probe will go out sometime over the next week to try and find out exactly what went on, but we're not going to get any results from that for quite a while right now. It may take 2 weeks even for the gas to stop pouring out of these pipelines to even be able to see what's going on the sea floor, and we haven't got any kind of indication of how long it will take to fix these pipelines, so any kind of expectation of how long until these pipelines will be operational again needs to be taken with a massive grain of salt, but we could be looking at months or even years here. Now, those are the immediate facts about what we actually know happened so far, and we then have a bunch of other various things like countries laying blame at each other, as you would fully expect. The West is blaming Russia, as you would expect, and Russia is blaming the West, again, as you would expect. It seems that at least in that sense, all is well in the world. Our governments are still our governments. Now, the legacy media outlets are doing exactly what you would expect, and they're saying that it's likely Russia who's at fault here. But there is also another massive possibility that the US is at fault here, and then there's a small chance that it was some other third party. Now, we will first look at the possibility of Russia being the culprit and then the US, so please wait until you've watched this entire video before you start with your angry comments. Now, firstly, we need to establish just whether or not Russia actually could have done this, as in, do they have the capabilities? Now, I am not an expert on this at all, and neither are you, but there are some experts online who have given their opinion, like this guy behind me here who put out this Twitter thread. They say in general, yes, Russia could have done this. They do have that capability, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world. It was certainly possible though. Now, needless to say, the energy crisis in Europe is likely to spell disaster for the hundreds of millions of people in Europe, and the signs of this are already here. With the worst stock market losses in 50 years, $13 trillion of value lost, more than the GDPs of Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom combined. In order to salvage their clients' portfolios, global institutions like JP Morgan and Bank of America are placing a renewed emphasis on alternative assets, in particular with things that have a low correlation to traditional investments like contemporary art. The New York Times writes that when stock markets start to take a nosedive, people invest in art. That's why Masterworks is helping investors follow the advice of 85% of wealth managers and get this very same allocation to contemporary art into their portfolios, but for a fraction of the cost. They buy contemporary art from legends like Basquiat, Banksy, and Picasso, and then they break it up into shares. That way, you're investing in a portion of an actual physical piece of artwork, and then when Masterworks sells on the painting, you get a piece of the potential profits. So far, they've sold 6 paintings with a 29% average net return to their investors, even through a bear market, COVID, and rapid inflation. Of course, I have to mention that past performance is not a guarantee of future results, but Masterworks has done so well that there's now a waitlist to join their 500,000 members, which you can skip by clicking the link down below in the description of this video. Again, that's Masterworks in the link down below in the description and the pinned comment of this video. Now then, we need to work out whether or not Russia would actually want to do this, and well, the answer is maybe, but I don't actually really think so. You see, they'd already stopped sending gas to Europe using those NordStream pipelines. They've had the capability to do that, to dictate how much or if any gas at all is exported, because they controlled the pipeline in its entirety, and they do want to limit the gas that they export to Europe to try and put pressure on those various countries. But again, they've already been doing that for months now. Blowing up the pipeline actually seems to be taking power away from Russia in this situation, as they no longer have the ability to turn the taps back on if they wanted to. They lose a negotiating position in essence. They used to be able to say, hey Germany, if you stop supporting Ukraine, we'll give you some natural gas again. And in the depths of winter, that could be an incredibly valuable proposition to make, but they no longer have that option at all. Russia also had invested a large amount of money into these pipelines over recent decades, about $20 billion in direct costs of actually building the pipeline, and then billions more on other things like lobbying as well. All of that is now a lost investment. Now, this for me is quite a compelling point, and I think this is the reason that ultimately it's a little bit unlikely that Russia is the culprit here, because they lose so much power from this development. There are still some reasons that Russia might have been at fault here. They could have been the culprit. This does put further risks on the gas supply to Europe, and that puts Europe in a weaker position, and that is obviously a good thing for Russia. Russia does still have other smaller gas pipelines going into Europe that it can export via. They just don't directly go through Germany. This will also cause a bunch of tensions amongst the allies in Europe, both within countries inside Europe and with the US and other external parties too. There are lots of accusations here that the US is actually at fault, and it's very plausible that the US becomes a bit of a boogeyman in Europe, especially when it gets cold because of these allegations. Again, that would be good for Russia. Divided allies are a lot easier and more desirable than very close ones. Really though, this still doesn't add up for me, and it doesn't quite make enough sense. So I think it's more likely that someone else is at fault for this action. Now, I do hope that people don't think I'm being biased in favor of Russia there. I feel like I'm almost always accused of being biased against Russia, if anything. So I hope that no one thinks I'm being unreasonable in my assertion that it probably wasn't Russia, but it is possible it was them in the end. Now on to whether or not the US is the culprit, and this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. Now, back of the beginning of 2022, when Russia was gearing up for the invasion of Ukraine, the West was trying to pressure Russia to stop their buildup, and Biden came out with this little remark here.
Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Biden basically said that if Russia invades Ukraine, the US will stop Nord Stream 2 from exporting gas to Europe. The reporter says, how will you do that? Because it's between Russia and Germany and doesn't really have anything to do with the US. And Biden says, I promise you, we can stop that. Now, lots is being made about this for obvious reasons. It seems that Biden threatened that they could blow up Nord Stream 2, and we've just seen both Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 be blown up and disabled. This video has been going around and getting a lot of attention, but there is a problem with this idea. I don't actually think Biden was talking about Nord Stream 1 at all, and I don't think he was hinting that the US military would destroy the pipeline. I think he was talking about pressure the US government would provide onto the German government to stop Nord Stream 2 from ever going into action in the first place, as he specifically talked about Nord Stream 2 in that clip, not the first pipeline. It's also worth noting that Germany had already decided that they would never open up Nord Stream 2 after Russia invaded Ukraine, and this happened after Germany found itself under ridiculous amounts of pressure from allies like the United States. It seems that the Biden administration had already carried out Biden's promise months ago, so I don't think this clip is actually as relevant as many people are claiming. That being said though, there is still the possibility of the US being the culprit here. There is the motive for the US to bomb the Nord Stream pipelines, but it really just isn't too clear. The first reason that this might be the case though is that the US would obviously like Europe to stop being dependent on Russian gas. Germany has been entirely compromised by its reliance on Russia over the last year, and the rest of Europe as well, but to a slightly lesser extent. America wants allies that aren't dependent on their own enemies for obvious reasons. It makes them stronger. The idea here is that maybe the US destroyed the pipeline to ensure that Germany wouldn't go back against its recent actions. There's been lots of fear about that recently, with Russia trying to apply pressure to do just that, to get Germany to open back up to start buying as much gas as possible and recognize their failings. Now, there is actually quite a lot of evidence to support this assertion here.
Do you think Germany's been as aggressive as they should be?
I'm quite an admirer of Chancellor Merkel, and I heard her statement when she was with President Obama in Washington. I thought it was a very good statement. But now we need to have tougher sanctions, and I'm afraid at some point this is going to probably have to involve oil and gas. The Russian economy is vulnerable. 80% of Russian exports are in oil, gas, and minerals. People say, well, the Europeans will run out of energy. Well, the Russians will run out of cash before the Europeans run out of energy. And I understand that it's uncomfortable to have an effect on business ties in this way. But this is one of the few instruments that we have. Over the long run, you simply want to change the structure of energy dependence. You want to depend more on the North American energy platform, the tremendous bounty of oil and gas that we're finding in North America. You want to have pipelines that don't go through Ukraine and Russia. For years, we've tried to get the Europeans to be interested in different pipeline routes. It's time to do that.
That clip there was from a 2014 Obama administration official talking about changing where Europe gets its energy from. Now, would the US actually do this? Would they bomb the pipelines purely to ensure that Europe doesn't import any more gas in the future? Well, again, I'm really not sure, because this doesn't make perfect sense. Russia had already shut down Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 had never opened in the first place. Europe a week ago was getting no gas from these pipelines anyway, and this also weakens Germany and Europe's as a whole position. It takes away an option and bargaining point too. The US does want Europe to be more reliant on it and not other external powers, yes, but not at the huge expense of security and strength in Europe itself. From a monetary point of view though, there is an argument to be made. Gas prices obviously jumped on this news, and they're more likely to stay high too because supplier is lower permanently now. The US has actually been exporting a lot of liquid natural gas to Europe, and they've been doing a lot of that over the last year, and this will cause them to make a little bit more money in the short term. Europe also needs to replace its reliance on Russia's energy exports, and build more capacity for liquid natural gas is an option for that, which means that the US can then sell more liquid natural gas to Europe in the future for years too. There are lots of conspiracies about this going around right now, but there is no evidence to actually suggest this is the cause, this is the case, or that this is the motive behind the US. The US definitely has the capability to do this, and they are one of the few countries that does. At the moment though, that is mostly just a random theory that people have come up with, and that's why I'm sort of calling it a conspiracy theory. Now, the Polish ex-defense minister tweeted this, saying, "Thank you, USA." Obviously, he thinks that the US did this to ensure that Germany can't import more gas even if it wants to, but I do want to point out that this man is no longer in government, and he would definitely have not been in the loop of US decisions like this. This is just his opinion, and all the evidence so far talking about either side being the culprit is so far circumstantial. Finally then, there is also the small possibility that this was some other group or country here at play. Now, I don't have any facts here again, just speculation, so again, take this all with a grain of salt. But a country like Poland, for example, or Ukraine, or the Baltic countries will be very happy at this news. They don't want Russia to be getting any more income from exporting their natural gas. They want Europe to have energy security and not be reliant on Russia at all. And this helps to achieve that aim. And they don't really suffer from no more natural gas because they weren't getting any gas from Russia in the first place. In a similar vein, it is also technically possible that some kind of rebel group did this with the same sort of idea. Now, I have no idea of the capabilities of these random militaries, if they have the equipment, the training, or the personnel to carry this out. So please, again, take this all with a massive grain of salt. But the possibility is there that it wasn't the US or Russia at all, but someone else. Now, in my completely biased and not at all evidenced opinion, I think there's probably about a 60% chance that this was the US, maybe 30% that it was Russia, and 10% someone else. There are problems and flaws in the ideas behind every one of these plans from every side, but there are merits behind those motives as well, so it's incredibly hard to say. I do want to make a point, though, that no one should have a hard opinion on who is at fault here because we just don't know. If anyone says that they are 100% sure that the US did this or they are 100% sure that Russia did this, then they are not thinking critically and they've let their biases take over because, again, no one knows for sure. Now, what does this all mean for our economies, though? Well, put very simply, it means more of the same. It means more weeks and more months of high gas prices all over Europe that will not change anytime soon. Yes, because the war is still going on, but also because Russia physically can't export that much gas quickly anymore. This means that the businesses that have been set to go bankrupt as operating costs soar from the energy crisis are still in that same position. It means that families on the brink of poverty will still suffer as just heating a home is going to get more and more expensive. It means that the recession that Europe is already in is actually going to get worse, not better. It means that the stock markets in Europe are going to suffer. It means that people's incomes will suffer. It means that business incomes will suffer and the economy as a whole will suffer. Yes, this will mostly hit Europe, but the rest of the world will be impacted as well. Natural gas markets aren't as global as oil markets, for example, and so prices in different countries or continents do vary by quite a lot because it's incredibly difficult and expensive to move natural gas. Liquid natural gas markets do make them more mobile, and so there will be a lesser rise in natural gas prices in other parts of the world like the United States, but nothing like what we'll see in Europe. Europe, though, let's not forget, are massive importers of goods, and those goods will see lesser demand. That means China will see less demand for its exports, as will South America and Africa and the rest of Asia, and the US will of course be affected as well. The effects of this will be absolutely massive, and they will reach every corner of the earth. For just a little bit of context, Apple alone, one of the biggest and most important companies in the world right now, gets about a quarter of its profits from the EU alone. That's excluding European countries out of the EU, and other major American companies are in a similar situation. This will be felt by you, even if not immediately.